There comes a season in a man's life where his fire no longer feels like fire at all, just flickers of caffeine and anxiety pretending to be ambition. You wake before dawn not because you're disciplined, but because your mind refuses to rest. The phone glows like an altar beside your bed, promising stimulation, and you kneel before it each morning, praying to the algorithm for direction. There's no silence anymore, only the hum of perpetual urgency, notifications, unfinished goals, the chorus of not yet enough echoing in your head. You chase productivity like a mirage, stacking habits, apps, and hacks until life feels like an open browser with 1,000 tabs you can't close. Each day pulls you thinner. Each night feels heavier. And though your calendar is full, your spirit feels hollow, as if your body goes to war while your heart stays home. You scroll through other men's victories, shredded physiques, polished routines, minimalist desks, and wonder when your effort started to rot into comparison. The irony cuts deep. In your hunger to become more, you become scattered. You can't focus. You can't breathe. You can't remember why you started. There's humor buried somewhere in the absurdity. You drink coffee to think, scroll to relax, plan to avoid action, and call it balance. You've read enough books to build an empire, but can't sit still long enough to build a morning. Your desk is lined with notebooks half full of intentions and completely empty of follow-through. You even begin to fear the quiet moments because silence shows you the truth. It isn't laziness that's breaking you, it's noise. You become a man of motion without movement, effort without essence. Somewhere between deadlines and dopamine, the machinery of your mind has overheated. You find yourself growing cynical about motivation itself. You think, maybe this is life now, a constant loop of anticipation and exhaustion. After all, isn't everyone tired? But there's a different kind of fatigue, one that hums beneath the surface like a warning. It's not tiredness of the body, it's depletion of the soul. It's when your achievements stop feeding you and start feeding on you. Days blur together, not because you're busy, but because you've stopped being awake. You start to notice small betrayals, how you lie to yourself about tomorrow, how easily you trade purpose for convenience. The phone steals your focus, and your focus steals your life. Then comes a quiet reckoning, that subtle yet brutal realization. Your mind no longer serves your purpose. It serves your distractions. It works for your phone, and worse, it obeys. You have become an obedient servant to impulses you don't even respect. That's a breaking point, and some call it burnout, but it's more precise to call it spiritual starvation. Burnout doesn't mean you've done too much. It means you've done too little of what matters. You no longer crave intensity, you crave meaning. Yet the modern world sells you noise in the name of meaning. You try to meditate, but stillness feels unbearable. You try to journal, but honesty feels foreign. And beneath all of it, a sentence whispers through the chaos. There has to be another way. That sentence becomes a seed. Because the truth is, no man can live long without a code. Chaos might feel thrilling for a while, but only order grants peace. Somewhere deep down you sense it, not in theory, but in instinct that an older wisdom is waiting, something timeless enough to cut through this modern fog. You don't know what it is yet, but you can feel it calling, quietly but unmistakably, like steel ringing against stone. And so, standing in the rubble of overstimulation, you make a silent vow to rebuild, not with gadgets, not with gimmicks, but with stillness itself. Because the shift didn't come from new tech or another morning routine. It came from something 700 years old. There was a time when men lived by code so deeply embedded in their bones that they couldn't separate discipline from identity. Life wasn't measured in likes, but in loyalty. They woke not to chase another notification, but to uphold a principle. In the old world, a code was a compass, an invisible spine that held a man upright even when life tried to bend him. But somewhere between convenience and comfort, that compass was misplaced. We've traded the sacred for the synthetic. Emails have replaced arrows, but the fatigue feels the same. Our battles are bloodless now, yet the exhaustion cuts just as deep. The arena may have changed, but the enemy remains the untrained mind, the unanchored will, the man who no longer trusts his own word. That's a true crisis of the modern age. Not depression or distraction, but disconnection from a code that once gave meaning to every strike, every silence, every day. The samurai called their code Bushidō, the way of the warrior. It wasn't merely a set of rules. It was an internal architecture that shaped every thought and gesture. Honor wasn't a mood, it was an operating system. To live without honor was to stop being human. Bushidō taught that discipline born from devotion is freedom, while freedom without discipline is collapse. It trained men to fight not for glory, but for purity, and act performed as perfectly as possible, regardless of who was watching. They practiced shugyo, a word the West barely understands. It translates to austere training, but in truth, it means purification through practice. Every repetition was an act of cleansing, burning away weakness until only presence remained. For the ancient warrior, training was not preparation for life, it was life. Contrast that with our current reality, chaos disguised as freedom. We pride ourselves on independence but drown in choice. We boast of convenience but ache for meaning. We become skilled at polishing the outside while letting the inside decay. Each new generation inherits faster tools but weaker focus, more access yet less peace. We build empires of efficiency and die of mental clutter. What we've lost isn't technique, it's a ritual that gave technique a soul. Consider how the samurai bowed before their sword, or how monks swept temple floors in silence. That bow, that sweep, wasn't superstition. It was a declaration that how you do the small things determines who you are in the great ones. But today, we rush through everything. We multitask devotion. Even gratitude has become a checklist. Something in the collective spirit has fractured. The world rewards noise, not depth, cleverness, not character. Men are told to be flexible yet complain they feel formless. They are told to self-express yet have nothing grounded within to express from. The culture praises authenticity yet despises restraint, forgetting that the most authentic energy a man can embody is consistency. Without a code, masculinity becomes a costume, loud online, hollow within. The ancient samurai would have pitied such restlessness. They would have seen our anxiety not as a moral weakness, but as a natural sickness of living without a center. Imagine the calm of those warriors, moving through chaos with precise stillness. Their serenity wasn't genetic, it was earned through daily friction. Shugyo trained their spirit as fire tempers steel. Every dawn was a duel against self-indulgence, every night an audit of the soul. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. The world hasn't truly become harder. We've simply become softer. We've confused peace with comfort, forgetting that true peace often feels painful at first. The discipline that once forged calm now feels oppressive to those addicted to distraction. Yet inside that old order was a strange kind of mercy. The man who submits to form becomes free from chaos. Maybe you can feel it, too, that unspoken longing to belong to something inviolate, something immune to the shifting winds of trend and opinion. Deep down, every man craves a code, something uncompromising that demands the best of him. Not another productivity routine, but a sacred discipline, a path where his word becomes law again. Because when a man's word stops being law to himself, he becomes a stranger in his own life. So I started searching for a code, one that could survive both the battlefield and my inbox. They say every transformation begins with a single act of defiance, but mine began with a single act of presence. After months of trying to fix myself with complexity, I stumbled into something ancient and startlingly simple, the practice of Kenshō. In Zen, Kenshō means seeing one true nature, not as an idea, but as an awakening that occurs in the silence between thoughts. It isn't enlightenment in a monastery or some holy moment beneath a mountain waterfall. It's the quiet realization that awareness has always been waiting beneath distraction, just asking to be seen. The samurai practiced their own form of this through ritualized presence, transforming ordinary routines into spiritual training. They didn't separate the mind from the sword, or the soul from the strike. Every act, no matter how mundane, became an opening into deeper clarity. This was their secret. They didn't chase focus. They embodied it. So I built my life around one habit, a daily Kenshō practice, a deliberate ritual to reconnect doing with being. 3 movements performed without rush or decoration, each as simple as breathing but as exacting as combat. The first step was morning silence. 10 minutes, no phone, no soundtrack, no stimulation. Just me and the stillness sitting face to face. Knees folded in the Caesar position, spine anchored but soft, hands resting like question marks waiting for an answer. The first few days were brutal. My mind howled to check messages, to adjust posture, to escape. But something strange began happening around day 7. The noise started to reveal its structure. Beneath the chaos lay a nervous rhythm of craving, a loop that fed on speed. The moment I stopped feeding it, the hunger turned to clarity. That's a paradox of silence. Resist it, and it becomes unbearable. Surrender to it, and it becomes medicine. Those 10 minutes weren't about becoming calm. They were about remembering that calm was always there, buried under overstimulation. The second step was movement with total presence. Not gym workouts or disciplined suffering, but one deliberate task done as though it were the only thing that existed. Some days it was brewing tea. Some days, sweeping the floor. The rule: complete it without distraction, without hurry, without half-thought. This was a samurai's way, training the body as a gateway to train the mind. They understood kata: form creates reality. You practice form until form disappears and essence remains. When I move with attention, even in small chores, I notice how restless I become in every other part of life. Most people think that burnout comes from work overload. In truth, it comes from underpresence. Their fingers move faster than their spirit can follow. The body hurries ahead while awareness trails behind like a ghost. Doing one thing with undivided attention is the purest rebellion in a fractured age. Each morning, I performed this practice as obedience to something higher than my impulse. And little by little, movement became meditation, effort became clarity. The final step was reflective journaling, a quiet autopsy of the day's mind. Each evening, I would write a single paragraph answering one question: what truth did the day reveal about me? Not what I achieved, not what I planned, but what I saw. Some days, the truth was uncomfortable. I saw impatience hiding behind ambition. I saw fear disguised as discipline. But over time, that truth-telling became a form of purification. This was Shugyo in miniature, the practice of refining one's spirit through daily reflection. Writing forced me to confront the internal noise I hid from during the day. By seeing it on paper, I stripped it of its power. Slowly, the voice of ego grew quieter, replaced by something steadier, the observer who simply watches. And this is where Kenshō lives, not in moments of victory, but in the still gaze that sees reality without distortion. The pen became my sword. Each honest sentence cut through delusion. Each reflection restored integrity between thought and action. Psychologically, this practice stitched together the fragments of a distracted existence. It mirrored Kaizen, the Japanese philosophy of continuous improvement, 1% better each day, not as performance, but as purification. 10 minutes of silence, one deliberate action, one honest reflection. Each seemed trivial in isolation, yet together they formed an invisible discipline. The modern mind seeks intensity, the ancient mind sought iteration. And in this, the samurai had an advantage: they revered the boring. They understood that mastery is born from monotony sanctified by awareness. Neuroscience would call it flow state training, but the ancients knew it simply as alignment. They weren't chasing stimulation. They were chasing stillness through excellence. What modern psychology wraps in data, Bushidō wrapped in reverence. By the third week, this practice began to shape everything else. My focus extended beyond the ritual. My words slowed, my appetite for noise faded. I became deliberate, even in conversation, in the way I walked, in the way I paused before responding. What began as discipline turned into identity. The cracks in attention closed like healed scars. I realized this habit didn't make me unstoppable because it built endurance. It made me unstoppable because it built awareness, the power to act without being dragged by thought. The essence of every warrior and every monk is the same: a mind that doesn't flinch. Kenshō practice isn't a productivity hack. It's a sacred rebellion against fragmentation. It's remembering that simplicity isn't weakness, it's command. The still man moves faster than the distracted one, not because he rushes, but because every motion is precise. The world tells you discipline is about restriction. The samurai knew it was about liberation. This ritual became my bridge between the chaos of modern living and the calm center of ancient wisdom. 10 minutes of silence to meet the self. One act to honor the world. One reflection to align them both. No apps, no gimmicks, no slogans, just presence repeated daily until presence became instinct. And like steel folded 1,000 times, every repetition refined the edge a little sharper. But a habit's value isn't in theory. It's forged in repetition, and repetition reveals your true master. The first 30 days felt less like a journey toward mastery and more like trench warfare against my own impulses. I didn't wake each morning feeling enlightened. I woke resentful of my alarm, bargaining with discipline like an addict negotiating another fix of comfort. The silence that once felt peaceful now mocked me. 10 minutes of sitting still became 10 minutes of mental chaos, to-do lists, random memories, even imaginary argument paraded through my head. I wanted to break my vow hundreds of times. It's easy to talk about self-control when the sun is out and motivation is high, but discipline isn't born in comfort. It's forged in friction. Each second of stillness was like sanding away a layer of false identity. And sanding hurts. Some mornings, I'd cave, just a quick scroll. I'd tell myself, and minutes later I'd be back in the digital slipstream, feeding the same hunger I had sworn to starve. The shame that followed wasn't cinematic. It was quiet and familiar, that sinking recognition that I had betrayed myself again. I wrote about it that night, not as punishment, but as documentation of the war within. On paper, I saw it clearly. The battle wasn't between my goals and the world's distractions. It was between two versions of myself. The impulsive boy chasing dopamine and the emerging man chasing mastery. They dueled daily, and their battlefield was my attention. There were brief victories. By week 2, something shifted. The silence stopped shouting and began whispering. Sometimes I could feel seconds stretch wide, as if time itself respected my effort. This new clarity came with an equal dose of discomfort. When your life slows down, you start seeing things you've been avoiding. The small lies, the unresolved guilt, the clutter not in your room, but in your spirit. Discipline doesn't cleanse by adding order. It cleanses by exposing disorder. I began realizing that I didn't fear failure nearly as much as I feared responsibility. It's easier to stay lost when you can blame the noise. Stillness removes that shield, and the reflection it shows you can be merciless. Musasha once wrote, "You must defeat yourself with yourself." Those words echoed every time weakness tried to reason with me. The world says, listen to your feelings. Musasha says, train them. Somewhere between those lines lies freedom. Feelings, left untrained, are tyrants, loud, persuasive, deceptive. They whisper stories of take it easy, you deserve rest, tomorrow will be better. But every man who's ever built anything real knows that tomorrow is just a day wearing disguise. So I trained my feelings as I would a stubborn horse, with patience, firmness, and repetition. Every time I chose stillness when chaos beckoned, I was taming the wild creature inside me. Every time I completed a task with full attention, I was hammering one more dent into the armor of ego. Not every lesson arrived with poetry. There were days the silence made me anxious, journaling felt pointless, and the movement practice seemed robotic. I cursed at the simplicity of the ritual, craving novelty like a child reaching for candy. That hunger for stimulation is the enemy of depth. I began labeling each urge, distraction, pride, vanity, as if cataloging demons. The act of naming them removed their mystery. By the third week, I started noticing micro-shifts. I'd catch myself before scrolling, breathe before reacting, finish a chore without resistance. Minor victories, invisible to others, monumental to me. These were the sacred fragments of progress that no applause could validate but every warrior recognizes. Humor kept me sane. I'd laugh at how melodramatic my mind became over 10 minutes of silence or one written paragraph. The great samurai of the past faced death daily, and here I was, heroic because I hadn't checked Instagram before sunrise. But the laughter wasn't mockery, it was humility. It reminded me that the enemy wasn't external. It was a lazy indulgence that had gone unchallenged for years. Every man fights his own war. Mine just happened to be against comfort. By the end of the first month, the edges of resistance softened. I didn't trust motivation anymore. I trusted momentum. There's a strange liberation that comes from realizing that no one is coming to save you. Not tomorrow, not inspiration, not luck. You either show up or you decay. The first 30 days prove that consistency isn't glamorous, it's surgical. It cuts away the weakness that hides beneath convenience. And as those days accumulated, I understood what the ancients meant by purification through discipline. It wasn't self-denial. It was self-discovery through endurance. Every evening, as I wrote my reflections, a single thought kept resurfacing. Maybe it was never the habit that was hard. Maybe it was confrontation with a man who feared the habit. The deeper I went, the clearer that truth became. It wasn't the silence fighting me. It wasn't the practice resisting. It was a weak man I'd fed for years, now starving and screaming for comfort as he began to die. It wasn't the habit fighting me. It was a weak man I'd fed for years. Around the second month, something imperceptible began to shift. It didn't arrive with fireworks or revelation, just a quiet recalibration, as if life's volume knob had finally been turned down. The mornings no longer felt like combat. They felt like ceremony. The silence that once suffocated now carried weight, substance, gravity. Each breath felt anchored. My thoughts still wandered, but they no longer dragged me with them. I could observe without chasing, sense impulses without obeying. And that ordinary stillness, once so elusive, became my most profound victory. When the mind inverts its loyalty from reacting to observing, the entire world rearranges itself around that calm. I started noticing subtle confirmations of change, waking before the alarm with clarity instead of dread, beginning work with purpose rather than stress, moving slow but achieving more. In public, small irritations that once lit anger like dry grass now passed through me unlit. One morning a barista mixed up my coffee after an exhausting night. I watched my old instinct rise, the impulse to correct sharply and then dissolve before I could act. The awareness itself had absorbed it. That was my first taste of mushin, what the samurai called no mind, complete presence without friction. It isn't emptiness, it's precision. Action flowing from awareness so cleanly that the self doesn't interfere. There's no excess thought to slow the strike. This is what every man secretly craves, not more control, but less inner conflict. Even mundane tasks began to feel alive. The 10 minutes of morning silence expanded throughout the day, into the way I walked to the store, the way I typed an email, the way I listened when people spoke. The habit had escaped its boundaries and was now weaving itself into identity. This was flow through form, structure serving liberation. It's paradoxical. You build a ritual to become disciplined, but with repetition, the ritual dissolves and only flow remains. The fighter who trains is stance full. Years no longer thinks of stance in battle. Structure gives spontaneity. Restraint births freedom. That is the essence of Zen in motion, to be fully conscious and utterly unself-conscious at once. There were moments that tested this newfound peace. Once, an argument flared with a friend who misunderstood my silence as indifference. A few months earlier, I'd have defended myself, layered words over ego until both of us drowned in pride. But in that moment, I simply breathed and let the tension run its course. The anger didn't vanish. It transformed, energy purified into awareness. Later that night, replaying the scene, I saw what I'd never noticed before. Control is not dominance over others, but dominion over self. The old mindset says power is assertion. The samurai knew power is composure. The stronger the storm, the stiller the mountain. Around day 40, distractions lost their sweetness. The urge to scroll or check pointless updates felt like biting into spoiled fruit. My journal reflected it plainly. Detachment wasn't suppression, it was clarity of appetite. When you feed on silence long enough, noise becomes unpalatable. That's Zanshin, the remaining mind, awareness that stays alive even after the act is done. Unlike common focus, which ends when the task ends, Zanshin trails behind like an afterglow of precision. You pour attention into one activity and find yourself more centered in the next. I began feeling it in work, in training, even in rest. Each discipline session reinforced the others, like threads strengthening a single cord. Externally, almost nothing about my life had changed, same work, same routines, but internally, everything had shifted. I no longer chased motivation, I embodied momentum. This was no longer about productivity, it was spiritual conditioning. The difference between driven and disciplined became obvious. Driven men burn bright, then out. Disciplined men burn steady, indefinitely. The reward wasn't energy or even success. It was peace, and peace is the ultimate efficiency. It's astonishing how much power returns to you once you stop wasting it on emotional reactions. One evening, standing before the mirror, I caught an unfamiliar reflection. The eyes were calm instead of restless, the posture grounded, the jaw unclenched. The mirror didn't lie anymore. I was standing straighter, but not because of posture. Something internal had solidified. The final 30 days didn't feel like a sprint to the finish line. They felt like returning home after being lost for years. The discipline that once demanded effort now flowed like breath. There was no inner negotiation, no debate between desire and duty. The practice was no longer something I did. It was what I was. Each morning arrived without anxiety, without pushback, without question. Stillness had become instinct. The silence no longer felt like a challenge to endure, but a source to drink from. Attention, once erratic and soluble, now seemed solid, grounded, immovable. Consistency carved deep grooves into my days, and those grooves began directing everything else, focus, emotion, even appetite, toward equilibrium. Something deep inside had rewired. I noticed it in the smallest details. The dopamine once tied to newness now fired in response to presence. The simple act of sitting, of noticing sunlight shift across the floor, of hearing breath move through the nose, generated a satisfaction more lasting than any digital rush. My perception of time altered. Days no longer felt consumed. They felt inhabited. When discipline becomes identity, boredom dies. There's always something to train, something to refine, even if it's simply the precision of awareness itself. It's a philosophy of Kaizen, continuous refinement through small sacred acts, 1% better not from need, but from reverence. The modern world glorifies intensity, grand declarations, viral transformations, the drama of effort, but the samurai mastered repetition. They knew that the man obsessed with perfection of form eventually transcends it. Repetition breeds grace, and grace is strength without struggle. Around day 70, I remembered something Musashi wrote, that a man should make his everyday stance his combat stance. That was exactly what was happening. Discipline was no longer reserved for meditation or journaling. It permeated everything. Washing dishes was training. Working was meditation. Speaking was practice. Each motion became deliberate, not rigid, but vivid, full of quiet authority. What surprised me most wasn't the external progress, though there was plenty of it, but the serenity it summoned. The more consistent I became, the calmer I felt. People mistake rigidity for discipline, but the truth is reversed. The disciplined man is flexible, while the undisciplined man snaps with every change. Consistency doesn't build tension, it releases it. Chaos no longer startled me. Uncertainty no longer owned me. Each repetition of Kenshō had sculpted not just a habit, but a nervous system trained for peace. The mind finally understood that it could rest inside effort, that work and stillness were not opposites, but two doors to the same room. There was a quiet triumph in that realization, not the loud pride of victory, but the silent confidence of alignment. I found myself needing less, fewer possessions, fewer opinions, fewer explanations. I didn't care to prove discipline. I simply lived it. The noise of ambition began to fade, replaced by a more stable form of hunger, not for expansion, but for refinement. I understood now that mastery isn't an ascent, it's a deepening. You don't climb to power, you sink into it. The man I was at day 1 sought control over himself. The man I became by day 90 no longer needed control. He was control, not rigid, but rooted. Friends noticed small changes, the way I listened longer than I spoke, the way frustration seemed to evaporate before it formed, the way peace seemed to follow me like weather. But this transformation wasn't for recognition. It was a private contract, an internal proof that ancient wisdom still has pulse in the modern world. Kenshō had taught me that spiritual growth doesn't demand retreat, it demands repetition. 10 minutes of silence, one complete act, one honest reflection, done daily, done sacredly. That's all it takes to make discipline indistinguishable from being. By day 90, the ritual no longer felt like practice. It felt like recall, as if I wasn't learning a new self at all, but remembering an older one buried under years of noise and weakness. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be unstoppable. It wasn't about relentless motion or invincible energy. It was about stillness so unwavering that distraction couldn't find a purchase. And in that silence, steady and unforced, I realized the shift had completed. I wasn't chasing discipline anymore. I had become it. Every system that survives centuries carries something sacred within it, something stronger than circumstance. The rituals weren't built to make life more efficient. They were built to make life more meaningful. Kenshō practice only worked because it was rooted in philosophy, not productivity. The stillness was never about silence. It was about truth. Once you zoom out from the mechanics, you see the architecture behind the habit, a design of being that ancient men lived by. Zen taught detachment, not to remove you from life, but to free you from the slavery of outcomes. Results come and go, moods rise and fall, but the man who acts without clinging can never truly be broken. He moves as a river moves, steady, adaptable, continuous. That's the seed of mastery, control through surrender. The impulsive man fights a current. The disciplined man flows with it. What looks like restraint is simply trust in the process. When the sword masters of old practiced shugyo, they weren't chasing perfection of swing. They were seeking purification through motion. Every repetition stripped away illusion until only presence remained. They didn't ask, was this better than yesterday? They asked, was this completely today? That's the essence of masculine discipline, giving everything, not because of reward, but because excellence is a form of worship. It isn't sterile rigidity, it's spiritual alignment, faith expressed through consistency. Through that lens, every small action becomes ritual. Drinking water slowly, finishing tasks cleanly, returning tools to their place. When a man performs small things with sacred intent, large victories follow naturally. Form shapes feeling. The modern age scoffs at such formality. It treats presence like a lifestyle trend instead of a way of being. But beneath every digital burnout and anxiety spiral lies the same fracture, disconnection from purpose. Mental health isn't only chemicals and stress. It's the soul rebelling against aimless motion. Gaman, another Japanese ideal, means enduring the unbearable with dignity, not suppression, but silent strength. To endure with grace instead of complaint is a forgotten art. You don't need to escape the storm. You need to remember how to walk through it without collapsing. That's what these martial philosophies were training. Men who could function in fire, calm not because things were easy, but because they had become steady. Presence leads to clarity. Clarity leads to mastery. Mastery leads to peace. It's a loop that feeds itself endlessly. You don't meditate to escape the world. You meditate to see it as it is. You don't train discipline to feel powerful. You train it to become unshakable in the face of powerlessness. Each link in that chain builds identity, not the performative identity shaped by comparison, but the grounded identity born from repetition. Kenshō reminded me that ancient wisdom was never old. It was timeless because it was functional. It gave structure to chaos and meaning to monotony. Where modern life says, express yourself, the old masters replied, perfect yourself, then expression will have integrity. And so the threads weave together. Zen detachment grants freedom from ego. Shugyo purifies action through repetition. Gaman forges grace through hardship. Together, they form an internal hierarchy of strength that transcends circumstance. The man without a code drifts, reacting to every gust of emotion. The man with a code ascends, guided by principles that cannot be purchased, only practiced. There lies the quiet secret of Kenshō. Your outer discipline mirrors your inner order. In the world's noise, discipline isn't about suffering. It's about remembering who you are. In the end, all transformation returns to a single promise, the one you make to yourself and refuse to break, no matter how small, no matter how quiet. You won't become unstoppable by copying habits, collecting methods, or chasing inspiration from other men. You will become unstoppable the moment your word stops bending with your emotions. Everything that shifts you from boyhood to mastery begins there. Discipline, stripped of its noise, is nothing more than self-respect made visible. Every silent morning you keep your ritual, every impulse you tame, every task you finish cleanly. These are small vows that say, I can trust myself again. The certainty of that trust is where strength is born. No coach, no book, no algorithm can give it to you. It must be earned in the dark, repeated until it becomes the only language your actions speak. The samurai called it living by the sword, not because of warfare, but because each day was an execution of intent. The modern warrior doesn't carry a blade. He carries presence. His cut is his focus. His honor is his follow-through. The world celebrates talent, but the code honors consistency. The world glorifies noise. The code rewards stillness. You already know what needs to be done. The question is whether you'll do it when no one's watching. Because discipline isn't a performance, it's a quiet covenant. When you fail, you rise without drama. When you succeed, you bow to the process that made it possible. There's poetry in that humility. Simplicity is strength. So this is a challenge, not advice, but initiation. Carve out 90 days. Choose one act of discipline and guard it like sacred ground. Silence first thing in the morning. One task completed with full attention, an honest line written each night. That's your training hole. 4 free months. Keep that ritual as a warrior keeps watch over his blade. You'll find that the real victory isn't the habit itself. It's the man it forges through repetition. And when the resistance rises, don't interpret it as failure. Recognize it as purification. At the end of those 90 days, write your declaration of code. One sentence. One vow that defines a man you intend to remain. Speak it aloud or keep it carved inside your mind. It's your sword oath, your compass, your threshold. No one needs to witness it. No one needs to approve it. Because becoming unstoppable has always been an internal ceremony, the quiet moment you decide to bear the weight of your potential with dignity. As the screen fades, imagine this truth landing somewhere behind your ribs. A disciplined life isn't a restriction, it's a reclamation. Every breath is a strike. Every moment, an arena. And in that arena, there's only one man you have to conquer, and one promise you have to keep. The rest is silence.